Hello, everyone. My name is Amanda Bush, and I am the student and school coordinator for the Multisensory Reading Center. Today, we have a community partner. We have Dr. Justin Turner with Expressing Life Chiropractic in McKinney, Texas. Dr. Turner, can you tell us a little bit about your background and experience?
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you, first of all, for having me on. But as most people probably realize or think anyway, I went into chiropractic thinking it was about low back pain, right? Neck pain, and in high school I had low back pain. Was going to go into the realm of injections and all that kind of stuff. Had an MRI done, and they came back and didn't really give a solid answer, which stressed me out. And now, after all these years in practice, I've realized that it's pretty common, right? And so they said that I had nerve bundle there that was inflaming, and that was causing my back pain. Well, I had one of my best friends in high school. He actually went to Parker here in Dallas, came home, worked on us, and it was a completely different technique. So I thought, that's awesome. I love working with people. I'm going to go to chiropractic school. I can work with my hands. I'm going to help them, right? Went through all of school thinking and understanding that chiropractic was all about neck and back pain. Graduated, went into the personal injury, auto accidents, and I honestly came this close from walking away from chiropractic just because it was not serving me at that point, right? It was just a lot of attorney stuff, just not what I had wanted to get into. I purchased a practice at that time, and that practice was probably about 80 to 90% above people that were 65 and older. And so I thought that was the way, right? Like back in the day, you bought into practice, and that was kind of the thing. And so I went from that model, and about a year later, I had a newborn walking into my office and completely freaked out. It was one of those things I was like, wait, I haven't really done this. I trained on it, but not to the extent that I feel comfortable, right? They came into the office. I texted one of my friends in Oklahoma. I was like, dude, what do I do? Like, he goes, get on this webinar tomorrow. I was like, I don't think you understand. Today is Friday. It's 1 o'clock. I'm headed to lunch, and they're coming in at 3 when I get back. And so he's like, okay, but get on this webinar. And so I finally had to commit to getting on this webinar the next day for him to be and tell me, like, you've got this, don't worry about it, you're perfectly fine, you know what you're doing. And it was just one of those things where I needed a little bit of reassurance at that point. Came in, and it was an awesome experience with that baby. However, at that point, that's when my entire life completely changed, as well as my son's life. And so we'll dive a little bit more into that, I think, later. But the big thing, that webinar was called Epic Pediatrics. And Dr. Tony Ebel, who is one of my good friends and mentors, actually created a thing called the Perfect Storm. And that is what we do in our office now. And so now, instead of having 80, 90% of geriatrics, I guess, we're 80, 95% pediatrics. So it's where my passion and what I love to do. So
That's awesome. Yeah. So you really explained how your path changed from the back and neck pain to working with children in this pediatric practice. And then on your website, I learned a lot about you from your background and your testimony about some of the hurdles that you overcame and went through with parenting a child with some sensory issues. And you know that, and I'll link that with this video because you should definitely check out the story. It's really inspiring. And with that, you know that Multisensory Reading Center works with students with reading difficulties and dyslexia, and we know you have a son with dyslexia as well. So can you tell us a little bit about how does your chiropractic work help some of the kids that you work with in the education setting or the academic setting?
yeah, great question. So if we kind of go back to that old model, and we think that it's about neck and back pain, like there's no reason for us to ever take a kid, right? And that's what I hear a lot about. But if we look at it being about the function of the nervous system, which is what we look at here, then what that tells us is if their nervous system, their brain and body are not communicating properly, and that brain is revved up, then they're not going to be able to heal themselves. They're not going to be able to focus. They're not going to be able to sit there. So, and as kiddos come into our office, what we're doing is, and everybody's like, what are you doing? What kind of therapy? What is that? Like, we're simply doing a chiropractic adjustment that is very specific for them at that time. We have a protocol that we walk through every time that they come in. And then we also have scans that we do about every month to check the progress and to see how red that brain is. When we calm that down, now that nervous system comes in and it begins to function the way that God always intended it to be able to heal itself. And then they actually are able to sit there and focus. So it's actually pretty awesome. We went through that same path with Jacob. And I even shared my story, like how frustrated I got, right? Like, I think a lot of parents were like, dude, sit there and pay attention and do your homework. Like, how are you not getting this? And so I shared that with a parent just yesterday, and they're like, yeah, like, we go through that same thing at the dinner table, but now we understand that it's not necessarily that they don't want to do it. They just simply can't at this point.
So it's like a whole body approach. Everything is affecting everything else.
Yeah. And so we really talk about the core, right? So we can maybe just treat one area, which is what happens most of the time. But if we're just doing that, then we're missing what's actually causing all the things going on, whether it's sensory, right? And a sensory overload, or we always hear like picky eaters, like, oh yeah, my kid's a super picky eater. And a lot of times it's much more of a sensory thing than it ever is a picky eating thing, right? And so as we calm that brain down, then all of a sudden they're now trying fruits, they're trying vegetables, they're trying things that they would have never tried before, simply because it's not an oversensory, or the brain's not going into that fight or flight stress mode that is saying, nope, danger, timeout, we're not going to eat that kind of stuff.
Wow, I never thought that it was all connected like that. That's really interesting. And so you work with all kinds of kiddos. How would I know if I'm a parent and having some difficulties with my child, both academically and not academically or behaviorally? How do I know if they'd be the right fit for your practice?
Yeah, great question. So if they are struggling, then that's the first thing, right? We kind of call those check engine lights. So and we actually have software scanning in our office that what I love about it is super safe. So we can do it on pregnant moms, we can do it on day-old babies. But there's three different scans. The first one is going to be the thermal scan. So it looks and checks at temperature and compares right to left. If there's discrepancy in temperature, that tells us that the brain is not communicating to the body properly. And then we've got surface EMG. So what that does, both of those go directly onto the back, but that looks at that brain to muscle communication. Again, we're looking for that overload in the brain. And what's cool about that is in the scan, it will actually give us what's called total energy. And so that tells us how much that brain is revved up. And then the last one is heart rate variability. And so depending on age, we have finger clip, ear clip, or if they're old enough, they put 3 fingers into the little box, and that looks at the heart rate variability, which will tell us, yeah, your kiddo's brain is super revved up. This is why they can't sit there and focus or eat or sleep or whatever it is, right? So my son Jacob, like his was one of the worst ones I've ever seen. Now, when we scan him, like it's all white, we want right. His was pretty much filled with red. And so the first thing I would say is, like, if they're struggling, give us a call. And then when we get that scan, we'll be able to say, yeah, this is something for them, or no, this really wouldn't work for them.
Okay. So the scanning gives you all the information that you need to be able to make a plan from there to be able to help them. And then
Exactly.
how long does it take to start seeing results, or what does that look like when you make a treatment plan?
Yeah, so that's always the fun question, right? And one of the top questions that we get. The crazy thing is we'll see within usually the first 3-4 weeks, we'll start seeing some changes. And I kind of call it like a system check. So all of a sudden sleeping's going better, right? Or maybe they coming in for focus, and that focus is a little bit further down because the body knows, hey, I've got to get sleep first in order to be able to regenerate the brain and focus and all of that kind of stuff. So it's going to go through all the major systems, and it's going to check those off and say, yep, we're running, we need this improvement. So it's kind of like a roller coaster in the beginning, and then all of a sudden I compare it to like a hockey stick, right? And so with improvement. And the cool thing is, a lot of times we'll actually see the scans change way before we see that outward. And I just explained to that is they've had all this negative input coming in from emotional, physical, and chemical stresses over the years, that's their expression. That's what they're putting out. Well, as we begin to put that positive input into the brain through the adjustment, then what that allows over time, it's going to start putting that positive output, which are going to have better expressions, right? And so, sorry, I can get off tangent a little bit sometimes, but it's one of those things where I get super passionate about, right? Because we've just seen so many amazing things with kiddos coming into the office and really getting their life back, as well as their family's life. So, but yeah, then we just put a care plan on that, and then every month we check them, we rescan them to see how they're doing.
That's really cool that you have that data to be able to, drive your plan too, and be able to give the parents that feedback. And that's kind of another, connecting similarity with Multisensory Reading Center and your practice, that, we're both making individual treatment plans for the students, based on their specific needs. There's no one size fits all. And then we're using that data to drive, in our case, drive instruction, and yours drive the treatment, and being able to check in and see how things are going. So that's really helpful to have that, to be able. And then you talked about some of the chemical, I forgot the term that you used, but something with chemicals. But I know in your story, you also talked about how your son was on medication and he was just not himself. Is that one of the main reasons or main ways that chiropractic intervention is different from the traditional medicine route for treatment for students?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely one of the big ones, right? And so what we talk a lot about chemical, physical, and emotional stresses. And so a lot of times, so like in Jacob's situation, he was born C-section. It was very stressful. It was emergency C-section, and a lot of scare went into that, right? And so then what happened after that? He had colic. Then he had ear infections. Then he had constipation. And so like on that perfect storm that I talked about earlier, we're just checking those boxes. Like, oh yeah, no wonder this kid is struggling at this point. So he was actually about 4 at the time. He has family in Mexico, and so his mom and him went down to visit. And his grandmother decided, yeah, we're taking him to a pediatrician. Pediatrician said, okay, we're gonna do medication. Well, when they came home, he was like a walking zombie. And so I think that's what you're referring to. But it was one of those things where it was like, no, like I would rather have the Tasmanian devil, which is what we referred to him as, instead of having this zombie, right? And so the problem, and I kind of talked about this earlier, is when medication, and it's not saying, there's no judgment here. If we've had kiddos on medication that come into our office that are now off of medication, there's kiddos that continue to be on medication. But the biggest thing is that medication is only focusing on that one thing. What is causing that inability to focus? That's what we're focusing on. So those are the main differences, is we're looking at the cause of it. We don't really care about the symptom. And I'll tell parents, like, they'll be like, oh yeah, we don't have a diagnosis yet. And I'm like, that's okay. And then other parents will be like, oh, well, we have this and this and this and this. And I'm like, okay, we don't care, right? Because we're not treating that diagnosis. What we're doing is we're going to the core of it. And I always tell them, I'm like, I'm not trying to be rude. I'm not trying to be mean, but it just simply, we're not looking at the symptom. To me, that symptom is an expression of an overstressed nervous system that's stuck in that sympathetic fight or flight side of the nervous system. So
that's yet another connection between what we do too, is, looking at all of these data points and struggling areas with a student that's having difficulty with reading and phonological processing and phonemic awareness. They don't have to have a formal diagnosis. Evaluations can be very helpful, especially in getting accommodations in schools. But they don't have to have that, specific diagnosis for us to be able to treat them. We're treating those symptoms like you were talking about too. So I know you have so much information, and it is all really interesting and very helpful. So if there's a parent that is watching this or listening to this, what should they do to set up an appointment, or what should their next steps be?
Yeah, so there's several. They can just call the office, and then we can kind of walk them through the whole process. They can also go to the website, which is McKinney Chiro. So that's McKinney, CHIRO.com. Facebook has a ton of stuff, ton of videos. And then we can even, if they want to know more of the science behind it, we've got, like I say, I do a monthly Perfect Storm workshop. But I do have one that I recorded a few years ago that is on there. They can reach out for that link as well. But they can text us at the phone number as well. So I mean, we have several ways for them to get into communication with us. Instagram, we have a lot of stuff on Instagram and stuff as well. So
Great. Well, thank you, Dr. Turner, for your time. And if you'd like to set
yeah,
up an
thank you,
appointment
man.
with him or a free consultation with the Multisensory Reading Center, just give us a call and I will link all of the information. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.